Hello, my name is Patrick Moore. Going to be talking about a very long title here, but it boils down to network automation, some of the hype that surrounds that vendors will feed you, and then some of the reality of what we can really do today. I'll talk a little bit about the past ways we did it, the current ways we can do it, and some of the future stuff. So these are some themes that I'll kind of talk through the entire presentation. Automation is not something you ever stop working towards. It's a journey that you're on for the full life cycle of your company. We're going to talk about traditional and future automation, and then some of the hype and reality, like I said. So the journey boils down to you have your physical network elements that you're used to dealing with today. There's a lot of scripting, a lot of manual work that you do with that. In some cases, that's what you're going to always do. There's use cases that happen infrequently enough, it just doesn't make sense for you to spend a lot of effort trying to automate that. You notice on the slide we have modest improvement and limited benefits on that track where you do manual plus scripting. That's totally okay for those things. You don't have to automate certain things. Another thing complicating this journey is virtualization and all of the various things that are getting introduced to that in networking today. NFV has been a big buzzword for the last couple of years. So you have different acronyms that get thrown around with VNFs and virtual routers, firewalls, load balancers, etc. SD-WAN is another big buzzword that's hot right now that also plays into this. The issue with the journey is all of these virtualization tracks are adding in an entire set of tools that they're introducing themselves. And you have this operational gap that's being created where there's existing operational processes and tools that you're using and brand new things being introduced. And our operational guys are being expected to manage both of those things and do so with not any more people and in some cases less people than they have today. So we think it's important that you converge that operational gap, and we'll talk about an approach later on in the presentation of how we think you should do that operational convergence. The central theme around what we think makes automation possible moving forward is programmability. We don't want to talk about SDN because SDN can mean 500 different things, depending on who you talk to, which vendor you talk to, which approach they chose to take to it. So we want to we think that programmability is the right way to talk about it. Our definition of programmability is that you provide software-like interfaces to your network. This can be through APIs, it can be devices that support netconf. It can also be with systems that you overlay on top of that provide you those APIs or netconf interfaces to work with those devices that may be legacy that don't provide that themselves. A big part of it is modeling and intelligent templates. Yang is a popular modeling language. Most people wouldn't consider YAML a model. It depends on how you use it as to whether that's another word that may be different. Different people define it different ways. Tosca is mostly a cloud-based, service-oriented modeling language that some of you may or may not be familiar with. I would imagine most people have probably heard of Yang and probably YAML as well. Few terms I'm not going to sit and read the slide. You guys will have access to these. But I mentioned netconf, Yang, YAML. NFV, network function virtualization, if you don't know a whole lot about that, I'm not going to dive too much into it because you could talk for hours about the various approaches. And Tosca I've mentioned. So traditionally, the way we've automated our networks has been very script-based. You have a specific task you want to do, you write a script to do that task. That gives you something you can repeat if you need to, tweak the script. Do very repeatable things, but it's very repeatable for a very specific task. So it's not as scalable as some of the things that we're trying to put in place now and in the future. It can be labor intensive to maintain those, especially if you want to have a centralized repository where everybody is using the same set of scripts. Sometimes you may have a change to the network that causes all of your scripts to need to be updated or new scripts created. It does avoid your need to go to your IT department and need a real coder, real developer to help do that, because there's probably not a single engineer in this room that's not capable of doing some scripting. I would be surprised if there is. So, but best case is this is a very human-driven automation. The future, notice we skipped the today, we'll get to today in a minute. The future is moving toward that model-based approach. It's going to be very scalable. Your models are going to be very flexible and able to account for various scenarios that you're going to be going through. You should have a smaller number of models. Those models are going to be more complicated than the scripts. That's a reality. You may have to involve an IT department or some developers, or build that expertise in your engineering group. That's that collision of IT development and engineering skill sets is something that gets talked about quite a bit. Both sides are going to think they should own this. That's what we run into. That means you have IT development groups thinking they should start owning the network. And I'm sure you all react very nicely to that, just like I do. You have engineering guys that want to reach further into some of the things that the IT groups own now as well. Some of the OSS tools and things like that. You want to take ownership of those because, you know, if we're going to own this piece, we need that as well. They don't like that just as much as we don't like them messing with our stuff. So there's some organizational challenges that are going to have to be conquered for this to work out well. But and we'll step through. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the hype, your vendors. Today, vendors like to talk about NetConf. NetConf is great. They tell you can automate everything. You have your Yang models on top of that. Those translate into NetConf. Automation becomes easy because you have NetConf. There are some problems with that. Some more hype is NFV. So we're going to have NFV. We're going to have these management and network orchestration systems sitting on top of NFV, the Nano stack. Everything's going to be automated. It's virtual, so it's going to be automated, right? That's a lot of people make that assumption. They're wrong, naturally, but that is an assumption many people make. So we get into some of the reality here. Most network devices are not NetConf compliant today. Different vendors take different approaches. Some are taking a REST API approach instead of using NetConf. And 3 vendors may take 3 different approaches with their APIs. Some people aren't trying to do NetConf or APIs. They want their own proprietary solutions to how you manage their systems. And they'll preach an automation message and if you buy every piece of equipment and every management system from that one vendor, then their story is accurate. But that's not realistic. All Yang's not created equal. Some Yang models are more complicated than other Yang models. Some vendors approach their use of Yang differently and they require different things. Yang is a standard modeling language, but some vendors put a little spin on certain things. Have an example. This is an excerpt of a Yang model for managing access control lists. If you're a newer person in networking, you know CLI really well, but you have no bent towards the development world at all, this may seem like a whole lot of trouble to go through just to be able to manage an access control list. On top of that, this gets interpreted by something into NetConf. This is NetConf that was generated just to make a simple change to one of the access control lists. This particular one was generated from the Cisco's NSO product. It's something that we work with a lot, so it was convenient to generate our example from it. there's some operational complexity that's added when you start talking about the model-based approach. There's new skill sets. Like I mentioned over and over, there's more IT development type skill sets that get introduced that you have to worry about. There's lots of tools. Some are good, some are bad. For the commercial tools, the NSO product from Cisco seems to be a pretty good option at the moment. It's not cheap. Quite the opposite, actually. It's very expensive. And in that vein, you don't necessarily need a Ferrari if you're just going to be running down to the grocery to pick up something for dinner. So if your company is small enough or your use cases are small enough for what you need to automate, you would be crazy to buy a Ferrari to run down to the local grocery to pick up dinner. So you have to think about that as you walk through here. And you have to remind your vendors of that. The netconf gang, like I mentioned, not supported widely enough to be as useful as you'd like it to be yet, and the intersection of those developer and engineering skill sets. So there's lots of options out there. I mentioned I list some commercial options. By no means would this be every possible one. There's also some open source options that you can get out there. I would suggest getting familiar with this so that when you do talk to your vendors, these are some things to play with. Good documentation exists for most of this. If you don't know a whole lot about it, it's a good thing to get educated on so that when you do talk to your vendors, they're not going to be able to pull the wool over your eyes, convince you of things of some nirvana that they can deliver that they probably can't. And I'm by no means saying that all vendors are liars. That's not what I'm trying to say there. But if you educate yourself, you protect yourself from some of that. I mentioned NFV is a big buzzword for the last couple of years. NFV does not equal programmable. It does not equal automated. It just means that you've taken those network devices that are a physical box sitting somewhere and you put them in a cloud somewhere. That buys you nothing except for not as many hardware boxes sitting out on your network, maybe. People think that virtualization means that physical things are going to go away. I would like those people to explain where you're going to plug your fiber into in the future, where you're going to plug any coax if you're a cable company, where your wireless signals are going to come from if you don't have radios and antennas. So virtualization is not the end-all be-all that some people try to sell it to be. But it is still in its infancy as well. It's very immature. Virtualization itself is nearing maturity, but the NFV concepts are not really there yet. A lot of vendors have virtualized by taking the code straight off of a box and modifying it just enough that it'll run on a VM. You technically have virtualized, but you have not, in my opinion, created a virtual network function at that point. You've just duplicated your physical box into a virtual environment. And we can talk later if anybody wants to grab me about why I think those are so different, if you disagree. Lots of management and toolings required that's not very mature yet. And once again, continued theme, IT ops, network engineering skill sets, there's this continuous collision of those. So we think there's an automation framework that's very generic, the way I've drawn it out. Not certain vendor products don't fit better into it than any other one. Certain open source projects don't fit any better into it than any other. But we do think that programmability is the key. The technology that enables that programmability isn't as important, but by no means is it unimportant. So, high-level approach, you have your physical network devices and your virtual network devices. And there's a reason I have programmability and a box to itself, and it overlaps the physical and virtual, because there are some physical devices that have APIs. Cisco's Nexus series is an example of that, and there are others. There's some virtual devices that provide those APIs, so you can directly programmably interface with those network elements. But for other items, the word I've chosen to use is interpreter. You need something that's going to translate what that legacy device that's been sitting out there for 5 or 6 years in your network and doesn't know the first thing about programmability. You've got to have something that can speak its language and translate between that layer and your upper management layers. I repeated that enough. I probably shouldn't say it anymore, but virtual does not equal programmable. So on the orchestration layer, you got to have something for those interpreters to talk to. In the virtual world, it's the ManoStack, Management and Network Orchestration, from the ETSI NFV standards. And then there's various network orchestrators. There's NSO from Cisco. There's Blue Planet has their Blue Planet orchestrator, and others. And those allow an exposure of APIs to a northbound system, or northbound set of tools. I've referred to it network automation control. That's where you can build operational automation applications that do specific things. You may have an application that provisions services, an application that does golden configuration, including compliance reporting and correction of that if you allow it to automatically do that. That's not always a good idea. It's usually not a good idea to let it automatically do that. Talking more about the specific needs. The interpreter, like I said, it translates the models and templates and other language involved to commands that those network layer devices can understand. Good examples of that, there's NAPOM that I know has been presented at the NANOG conferences a couple of times over the last couple of years. It's really starting to mature now. It has different modules to work with a lot of the Cisco devices, a lot of the Juniper devices, long list of vendors that are active there. Very active community. They're constantly adding to that. If you haven't checked out NAPOM, I highly suggest you check it out. Like I said, open source, something you can play with without having to spend a lot of money. Ansible, also open source, has its network modules to work with those various, including a module to work with NAPOM. Also, Salt is another tool similar to Ansible. The latest versions of Salt come with NAPOM pre-installed, so that's a good way to start learning NAPOM as well. Chef, Puppet, and then the proprietary thing, Cisco's NSO has its network element drivers. That's the equivalent of the interpreter, as I'm calling it. The next level up, the orchestration, is where you provide that modeling and that templating capability so that you can communicate down to those lower levels. Ansible can do this. So if your playbooks, things like that can provide this functionality. You'll see Ansible can be used at various stages. It's a pretty powerful tool. OpenO is one of the open source Mano tools in NFV world. Those are constantly changing. They're getting merged into various other projects. So there's a list of those that shifts around a little bit. Open Daylight has some capabilities with Yang and talking down to the network as well. Open source SDN controller. And then I mentioned some of the proprietary, the NSO, Blue Planet, and other tools. So the automation platform, this is probably the one I've really not talked about much at all yet so far. So you need something that can take a workflow and overlay it across the top of all of these things I'm talking about so that you can integrate across different domains. So maybe you have, if service provisioning, for instance, if you have a customer that wants a VPN turned up, there's one set of tools involved there. Maybe they also want a virtual server turned up in your VMware environment because they want to host Exchange on there as well. You're going to have some system to tie those various domains together if you're ever going to get to full automation. The group of people here, that probably wasn't the best example when you throw in the Exchange server, but it's our domain is a part of that greater domain. There's some various tools, Activity, Red Hat's JBoss, those are both open source, or you can pay for support. Proprietary, Pronghorn, ServiceNow, Remedy, any system that can do some scripting, high-level scripting and orchestration and workflow. Those are kind of the things that go together with that. And it's really the glue. I've heard people, projects I've worked on where we've done this, they refer to this as the glue that keeps everything together. So here, same diagram, but I mentioned some of the open source options that are out there. Once again, this is by no means all-inclusive. There's probably a lot more options in the automation workflow at the top. I filled up some of the other boxes, but there's only so much space here. Once again, Salt, Ansible, Napalm, good place to start. I also have a link at the end of my slide deck to the Network to Code Slack channel. Very, 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 very valuable place to go look and talk to people and ask questions. If you've not checked that out or a member of that, that's a very good place to go. So conclusions. Listen to what the vendors say, but listen with a grain of salt. They're trying to sell you their full stack. They're trying to sell you a full environment, management tools, pieces of equipment, everything from them. They absolutely can automate the heck out of your network if you have everything from them. That is absolutely the truth. That doesn't mean, if reality is you can't buy everything from that vendor, that doesn't mean you shouldn't still talk to that vendor, because at worst case, you're going to get inspiration from some of the things they tell you, and you should ask the questions of why can't I do that if I add in a second vendor? Because some of these open source tools that you can add in may add that capability for you. Consider open source tools. Some of the bigger companies are getting into that now. It's a big deal with AT&T right now, open source is. Set goals for automation. Make sure you sit down and plan this out. If you don't have a target, you can't hit it. Don't just randomly do this. Make sure you do some planning and some future thinking about what you want to do. Thoroughly evaluate your needs versus the vendor and open source capabilities out there. There are partners around that can help you figure that out. It could be the vendors themselves that would be fully willing to help further enhance their products. But make sure you're getting what you need. And I think that's any questions or comments or anything else? I feel like I flew through that a little bit, and I do have some links to various things that may be good references. Anybody wants to take a look? And like I mentioned, the Network to Code Slack channel is a gold mine if you're interested in looking at the open source tools that are available and some experts that have done some very, very, very cool things with it. In some cases, cool things that are in parity with some of the commercial offerings. Vendors probably don't want to hear that said, but it's true. So no questions. Thanks.